What's up, guys? It's Jenna with Dog Liaison, where I coach you on how to enhance your dog's mental health. On this channel, we break down scientific research in order to inform and educate us on how to train dogs. We are stuck in quarantine and it is getting boring, guys, I'll be honest. So I thought we would do something fun today that was inspired actually by a hairdresser that I follow on YouTube. And so I thought that we would answer Google's most frequently asked dog training questions. So let's get into it. How to train dog to walk on leash. Well, for starters, you want to start off with a target and you want to make sure that you have good eye contact, and you want to make sure that you are training in a very easy environment. One of the things that I see a lot of people do is they train the dog to walk on leash out in the world, and that doesn't really make sense. For example, if you were going to teach sit, or you're going to teach down or stay, you would start off in the house or in the backyard. You wouldn't necessarily jump right to practicing out in the middle of the street. And yet people tend to do that with walking on the leash. They tend to start teaching how to walk on leash out in the world. You would definitely want to make sure that you are practicing this in the house, in the backyard. Make sure that it's solid there. Make sure that you can walk out your door, your front door, or whatever door you use to leave, nicely on leash, and then start to apply it in multiple areas. But you want to think of your environment as part of your criteria. The other thing that I see all the time is that people forget and disregard how the environment affects the difficulty, and it's really important that you're keeping that in check. How to pee on a pad. So how to use a pee pad, very similar to any sort of dog training, as you would want to make sure that you're reinforcing them every time they go to that area. The one thing that I will tell people about pee pads is that unless you plan on using it for life, I don't really recommend using it at all, or unless there's some sort of medical emergency. Like if there's a medical need, that's a little bit different. But as far as like a behavioral thing goes, you do want to only use it if it's absolutely necessary. Usually people will teach the potty pad and then segue off of that into just teaching how to potty train outside. I don't really get that. Just teach the dog to go outside right out of the get-go. Now, if you're in an apartment and you need to use a potty pad, or if you're gone for a long period of times, then that would make sense as a sustainable option. But again, this really comes down to what your individual need is. If you don't really see yourself using potty pads as a long-term sustainable option, then I don't recommend you train it at all. Why is my dog panting? So sometimes that's stress induced, sometimes it's heat induced, sometimes it's just an accelerated heart rate. We can't necessarily think that just because your dog is panting, it's automatically a bad thing. You need to put that within context. So I would say go to the vet if necessary, but also look at the context of the pant. Why is my dog limping? Go to the vet. Why is my dog not eating? That could be for a lot of reasons. Absolutely could be a health issue. You need to take your dog to the vet first and foremost. Secondly, if it's not a health issue, it could be that your dog isn't valuing food enough, that it's not enough of a resource. So I do recommend that you pick that food bowl up, and you can check out this video to figure out some cool tricks that you can do to get them to eat a little bit more. Sometimes it has to do with contra feed loading, which you can check out in this video as well. That'll also give you some other tips on how to get your dog to eat. First and foremost, make sure there's not an underlying health issue there. How to train my puppy to. How to train your puppy with a bell. So I definitely would recommend you start off with the Pavlovian response. Every time they hear a bell, they get to go outside. So just create that association. Interestingly enough, Pavlov used a bell with dogs, so this is kind of in the same vein. But if you want your dog to use the bell, you need to start ringing the bell every single time they go outside. That'll bring the two together. Simultaneously, you can also teach your dog to target the bell. If you don't already know how to hand target, you can check out this video. But you would also use the similar technique that I use in this video to get them to target the bell, to get them to learn how to ring the bell. Then you start to link the two together, where you want him to ring the bell before he's able to go outside or to use the restroom or whatever. How to train my puppy not to bite people. So the first question I always ask people when they ask me how to get my puppy not to bite is, what is the reason your dog is biting you? What is the reason your puppy is nipping you? Because depending on the reason is going to affect the training, is going to affect what you do as an outcome. Some puppies bite because they're in pain, because their gums hurt and their teeth are developing. Some puppies are biting out of frustration because they're saying stop doing that, whether stop touching me there or stop, you know, walking that way or whatever. They're saying stop doing that. Some puppies are saying, are biting because they're trying to engage you in play. Sometimes puppies are biting to get you to walk away. That's something that's very confusing because a puppy might one day bite you to get you to pay attention and the very next day bite you to get you to walk away. Those are the same behaviors trying to accomplish opposite goals, and that can be very confusing. So the first thing you need to think about when your puppy's nipping is what is the motivation for the nip, and remember that there can be multiple motivations. It's not just like one motivation per dog. One dog could be potentially biting or nipping for a myriad of reasons. How to get your dog to come. Let's do a video on that. If you want a video on recall, make sure you hit like and tell me in the comment section below. As soon as I get out of quarantine and as soon as I have access to dogs, I promise I'll get you guys that video. How to teach your puppy to stay. I have a video on the 4 things not to do with the stay, and simultaneously I actually have another video on the 4 Ds that go along the lines of teaching stay. So make sure you check out both those videos. But if you're trying to teach your puppy to stay, the first thing you need to have is reasonable expectations. The one thing you cannot do is put your dog in a stay and then expect them to stay until you release them, and just see how far you can get and just see how long you can go. That's really unreasonable. You need to make sure that you know your expectations, know your criteria before you put your puppy in a stay. How to get my dog to stop barking. That's very similar to the nipping thing. You need to figure out the motivation for the bark. Different motivations of the bark is going to result in different behavioral fixes, like how you train it. And also depending on the bark and depending on the motivation for the bark is going to decide how hard it will be to train that. So for example, if the emotion motivating the bark is more visceral or fear-based or something like that, then that's going to be much more difficult to get the bark to stop. As a general rule, as by and large for vast majority of training, you need to prevent the bark from happening. A lot of times people will say that you need to just respond to the bark after the fact. That's really not effective learning. Effective learning prevents the thing from happening in the first place. How to stop a dog from digging. Just so you know, a lot of times, most times when dogs start digging, it's actually because they need to file down their nails. It is a very natural, habitual way for dogs to file down their nails and make sure they don't get too long. But then what it turns into is sort of a physical release and a release of energy, and the dog goes, hey, this actually feels good. So then it becomes a habit. But if you are pretty good about maintaining your dog's nails and making sure that they're constantly filed, usually you can prevent the dog from digging. If you have a pretty habitual digger where it feels like it's going on perpetually, something you need to consider is that the habit is happening obsessive compulsively. So it potentially is not even so much of a habit as it is an OCD thing. And at that point, you really need to treat it from a mental health standpoint, as opposed to just like yelling at him as a normal behavior that you can just criticize. If the digging is happening on autopilot and it's happening because there's pent up physical energy, it's happening compulsively, you need to start treating the dog more holistically and comprehensively. My dog to be calm. The best way to do this is to reward calm behavior when you see it. For example, when we see puppies, a lot of times we completely ignore them once they finally lay down and are calm, because we think that if we get up and move, that's more likely to disrupt the puppy and get the puppy to move again. You need to actually be paying attention to that. You need to actually be rewarding that behavior and replicate it very calmly. I actually intended on making a video on how to do this step by step, and right when I was about to film it, I actually had a session planned with a puppy to film it, and that's when the quarantine got put in place. So unfortunately, that training session had to be canceled, obviously, but as soon as I can get that video to you guys, I will. How to train my dog to be less aggressive? Well, again, we need to be thinking about what type of aggression your dog is facing. There are multiple different types of aggression, and the multiple different types of aggression are determined by the emotion motivating the aggressive behavior. So you do need to be determining what is actually making your dog aggressive. You also should be determining whether it's just reactivity, like frustration, leash reactivity, and response, or if it's actually like imminent threat aggression, because that can also affect the prognosis and your treatment plan. How to train my dog to be friendly with other dogs? Wow, that's a loaded question, isn't it? The reality is you can't necessarily teach a dog to be friends with another dog. You just in the same way that you can't really teach a person or force a person to be friends with another person. I think we have it in our mind that if we just put enough training, then inevitably our dog will of course be best friends with another dog or with all dogs. It's like, that wouldn't happen with people. You can't force a child to be friends with another child. A lot of it has to do with camaraderie. A lot of it has to do with mutual likeness. So there are a lot of variables that have to go into play with having dogs be friends with another dogs. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure you hit like, consider subscribing if I answered any of your questions. Many of these conversations that we had today, I go in depth on my channel, so make sure you hit subscribe and check out those videos. If you have any questions for me that I didn't answer here, make sure you ask in the comments below, and I'll see you guys soon.